to the November 15th City of Des Moines Plan and Zoning Commission meeting. I will read the rules and procedures for our audience tonight. The Plan and Zoning Commission is an advisory body to the City Council. The City Council will hold a public hearing and make the final decision on all matters before the Commission other than site plans and subdivision plats, unless denials or approvals are appealed, conditional approvals are appealed. Please contact the city clerk or the community development staff for details on council hearings. Applicants are given 10 minutes to present their request. Proponents and then opponents from the public are then allowed to speak in that order, which with each speaker being allowed a maximum of 5 minutes. The applicant is then allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal. The hearing will then be closed and the commission will discuss and vote on the issue. All comments should be germane to the item under consideration and speakers are to maintain a courteous manner. Items on the consent portion of the agenda, which we have one tonight, will not be individually discussed and will be considered for approval in accordance with the recommendation in the staff report unless an individual present or a member of the commission requests that that item be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately under the public hearing agenda. The City of Des Moines is pleased to provide accommodations to individuals or groups with disabilities and encourages participation in city government. When possible, please notify the city at least 3 business days in advance at 283-4209 should special accommodations be required. Assisted listening devices are available for meetings in this location. Plan and Zoning Commission meetings are broadcast on media cable channels 7.1 or 7.2 for customers with that service. And transportation to City of Des Moines meetings can be scheduled to and from DART Central Station at 620 Cherry Street. To reserve your route, please call DART on-call scheduling at 515-283-8136. Calls for trips are accepted up until 5 p.m. of the day prior to the meeting. Please be sure to mention in your request that you require transportation for the City of Des Moines meetings at this location. This notice is intended to comply with accessibility requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. All right, we can establish that there is a quorum present. And tonight we will be taking action on minutes from October 18th. I think I'll start with that one. Is there a motion on the minutes of October 18th meeting?
I can move.
Thank you. All those in favor of approval of October 18th minutes of this commission meeting, please signify by raising your hand. Are there any that want to abstain? Okay. And then are there any nay votes? All right, thank you. And now the minutes of our November 1st meeting. Got your motion?
Move.
Thank you. All those in favor of the November 1st Plan and Zoning Commission meeting minutes, please signify by raising your hand. Okay, got it. And is there anyone that needs to abstain? Okay. And are there any nay votes? All right, thank you. And now the consent item, I'll read it, and if we need to move it or remove it, we will do so. This is a request from Hoyt Sherman Place Foundation, 1501 Woodland Avenue, for vacation of an irregular segment of Bridle Row adjoining the subject property. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to hear this item? And again, that would be if you have any concern or question about the staff recommendation. All right, is there anyone on the commission that wishes to hear this item? Okay, is there a motion for consent?
So moved.
All those in favor of our consent item number 1, please signify by raising your hand. I don't think, is there anyone that needs to abstain?
I am abstaining.
Okay. And are there any nay votes on the consent? Right? So now we're ready for our only public hearing item tonight. And did everybody receive an updated, thank you so much for coming. You're welcome to stay if you want to hear this great report. The item that we're going to hear tonight is a city-initiated review and recommendation regarding an amendment to Plan Des Moines to adopt the Live Des Moines Parks and Recs Comprehensive Plan.
And I wanted to, Madam Chair, members of the commission, I wanted to make sure you have the revised staff recommendation and report in front of you, and it should have yellow highlighted areas that were modified. Essentially, that's and I'm going to let Richard, Deputy Parks and Recreation Director Richard Brown, refer to that. But
I may point out it's not yellow in our
It's-
copies,
oh, it's
but
not.
it's highlighted. Yeah, that's okay. It's just not
is
yellow.
it? Can you tell it's highlighted?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Save it on ink, colored ink. So Deputy Parks and Recreation Director Richard Brown is here, and he'll cover a few of the things that have changed in the time, because you had continued this at least once, I know. So in the interim, he was working with the plan and can elaborate on that, but also speak to the one thing that we are changing in the staff recommendation as well. So I'll turn it over to Richard, and if I could have Tyler switch to the computer.
Madam Chair, members of the Plan and Zoning Commission, Richard Brown, Assistant Parks and Recreation Director. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. We're very excited about where we ended up in beginning, undertaking, and really presenting to you what we're considering our new comprehensive plan for Parks and Recreation in the city. We're very excited about where we ended up and hope that you are as well. All right. Just to give you a little bit of background, this might be new to some people that weren't here the last time I presented, but we, through the last 12 to 18 months, have made 2,000 plus contacts with the public, people that use our facilities, residents of Des Moines, to figure out what they believe the future of Parks and Recreation is in Des Moines. And you can see here a lot of different ways we went out about doing that, from neighborhood groups to questionnaires to open houses, community discussions. We met with students. We had a steering committee, which appreciate Mike Simonson representing the Plan and Zoning Commission on that steering committee for really just putting together this plan. We also met with our Parks and Recreation Board subcommittees. We tried to knock on every door, overturn every rock, and talk to as many people as possible to really come up with what we think the future is. So also one of the things we wanted to do, not just figure out what people wanted to see for Parks and Recreation here in Des Moines, but we also wanted to reach out and see what maybe are some peer cities, some people we should be really benchmarking ourselves against, as well as some cities that we thought were aspirational. They have really great park and trail systems, great programming offerings. What do they offer, and what are they doing that we could really strive to be in the future? So we picked Madison, Wisconsin, Omaha, Nebraska, and St. Paul, Minnesota as really our peer cities. And the reason for that is they were either the largest city in the state or they were a capital, and sometimes both. We also then thought, what are some of the people you really want to strive to be from a Parks and Recreation standpoint? And so we found Minneapolis, Minnesota, Denver, Colorado, and Austin, Texas. Really great, outstanding park systems, great trail networks, as well as amazing offerings for recreational programming to really get people engaged in their community. As we went through that, we found a few key findings that were important to point out. So for Des Moines, we found really we have above average acres of parkland and miles of paved trail. we found that we have lower than average numbers of swimming pools and unpaved trails. We also had lower than average operating budget, and probably the most shocking statistic that we found is that all the other communities had 3 times the number of employees per capita than the city of Des Moines did. So we were very proud of that work because we're doing a lot of great things with Parks and Recreation here in the city of Des Moines without a lot of staff. And then finally, one of the things that they found in relation to these other cities is we have some room for growth in volunteer hours and the total number of volunteers that we work with. We have a very great volunteer program. We work with thousands of volunteers every year all throughout the park system, but really we have some room for growth, and we're excited about the possibility of that and growing how we engage people in the park system. After all that input and those benchmarking, we came up with really the following vision principles on what we want to see from Parks and Recreation here in the future. You'll see in the next few slides kind of when we talk about our goals, but we're talking about making sure that we provide equitable services and facilities to the residents that live here in Des Moines. And that really comes down to that our parks and trails are everywhere, and that means getting people close to a park or trail from wherever they live, whether it's the south side, north side, east side, you name it, and finding ways for them to engage with that park system close to their house. Because one of the things we saw, and people said most predominantly from a park standpoint, is that the neighborhood park is the park they visit most often. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily termed a neighborhood park, but it's the park that's closest to their house. So that's their neighborhood park. That's the park they use the most often. And that's really, I mean, if you want to look at one thing, is the way we want to make sure we serve Parks and Recreation in the future. It's everywhere. And that doesn't just mean the facilities, it means programming and ways to engage people and get them out here. We also talk about nature and making sure that it's available to everyone, not just in our large parks and along our greenways, but is there a bit of nature in pretty much every park out there? Also then talking about technology, how do we use it, how do we engage people? And finally, making sure that what we have for funding from an operational and maintenance standpoint is in sync with the funding that we have. So, you know, if we desire to have perfect turf throughout the park system, we got to make sure that matches up with the money that we have. So making sure those are in sync with what we do in the future. After all that input, we came down to we feel there's 5 goals that we want to accomplish over the next 20 years. And the first one is the equitable delivery of facilities and services. The second one is we want to provide programs that attract people to parks. So first one we're calling equity. Second one we're calling attraction. Third one, we want to make parks and trails the heart of the community. We're calling that heart, if we just a short little talk about it. Fourth one is improving our natural systems or nature. And the last one is launching new approaches to parks and recreation services. So we're really calling that one innovation. So as we look at these goals, there's really some approaches that will help us get out of the gate, get us started, and really start moving in the right direction. And with equity, we really need to do a few things first to make sure that we're taking a good look at this. We need to establish a baseline. So how are we serving the community today? How equitably are we serving the community today? And that really means developing and adopting policies regarding what equity means to the residents of Des Moines and the city as a whole. And then from there, we need to begin to measure the progress. And you can see the map here. It's a little bit difficult to read, but we had the consultant play with some different ways that you can measure equity. And so they grabbed a policy out of the city of Minneapolis. And as part of that, it really just looked at, areas of concentrations of poverty, high minority populations, high crime areas, and density of population to identify, if you did something like that, could you really quantify that from an equity standpoint from Parks and Recreation? So we believe there's some really great ways that working with the Parks and Recreation Board, the City Council, and a lot of other people in the community that we can develop some policies that really help us establish that baseline and then begin to measure progress. So some of the approaches to attracting people to our parks is, one of the things we heard is there's a lot of unmet recreational needs in the community. So we need to start a dialogue about that. And one of the ways we hope to do that is actually establish a recreation committee that is a standing subcommittee of the Parks and Recreation Board. They have multiple standing subcommittees, and we believe this would be a great addition to that engages a series of residents in what do they need from a Parks and Recreation standpoint, and what are the programs they need in the future. And then finally, looking at establishing a series of guidelines and policies that standardizes fees and evaluation tools for programming. So how do we look at that? Why are we providing a program in the future? How much should it cost based on the population we're trying to serve? And really just putting a series of guidelines together that can help us make recommendations to both the Parks and Recreation Board and the City Council. Approaches to making sure parks and trails are the heart of the community. One of the things Eric talked about is some language change in Plan DSM. And what we're recommending here is that we talk about this in a time kind of factor. So making sure that all citizens are within a safe 10-minute walk to a high-quality park or trail. The distance you can go in 10 minutes will vary based on certain factors, whether how difficult it is to cross a street, are there sidewalks around there? So we really felt that that was a better metric than a distance metric. If you look at it and you want to say, if you push me to say how far is that in 10 minutes, it's about a half a mile if you took all people and how long it takes them to walk and how fast they walk and what barriers. So that's kind of what we're saying, 10 minutes, but it'll be about a half a mile. And then we also want to work with residents to quantify what does high quality park mean. One of the things we've seen for a long time is that parks have always really been defined as a patch of grass with some trees, probably a picnic table, a small shelter, probably a playground, a basketball court, some sort of quantity of that. But we've seen a lot of changes in not just how people use the parks and open space areas across the community, but just in the diversity of people that live in Des Moines. So how do we meet the needs of their parks and recreation, and how do we define what the high quality park means to them? So it's going to be some dialogue, sitting down with residents, say, hey, what is a park to you, and what is a high quality park to you? So the hope is that really once this is adopted, we can launch into a pretty cool planning process that helps us to identify some of the gaps in our service. And when we say that, it's not just making sure that there's a park or trail within a 10-minute walk of their house, but it's also making sure that that park is high quality. So there may be parks that are beat up and run down. So it may serve a lot of people within 10 minutes of their house, but a lot of people may not go there because it's not really high quality to them. There are parks that may be high quality close to people's houses, but they don't go there and they need a reason to come there. So are there programming offerings that we could get out there to get engaged people and attract them to the park? Are there parks within 10-minute walk of people's houses, but there's not really a safe way to get there? Are they missing a small trail section? Are they missing a sidewalk or a safe way to cross the street? So looking at that and finding are there really easy ways that we can get people connected and close to parks in a safe way. And then finally, the most obvious one, but there are big chunks of our community that don't have a park or a trail within a 10-minute walk of their house. And so how do we go about identifying potential land acquisitions or partnerships? One of the things that we're really want to explore is working with the school district to take some of those neighborhood elementary schools and work with them to improve those sites, and then put it together an agreement that really secures that for public park access. I think we, in a lot of ways, consider most of the neighborhood schools to be open for park use, and the school district has said that after school hours. I don't think that's typical across the country, so that's why they don't automatically count as park service. So one of the things we'll do is we'll work in the school district to identify those gaps and see if there's possibilities of increasing and improving access to parks at neighborhood school sites. Nature. So how are we going to approach nature and making sure that's important as part of our park system? We want to educate people to understand and engage with nature in their parks, why it's important to have nature there, what's the importance of having wildlife and sensitive natural features within our park system. We also want to be able to describe why we want healthy landscapes. What are their benefits to people that live here and people that visit Des Moines? And then also, too, we want to talk about creating a system-wide natural resource management plan. We also want to, as part of that, look at methods in how we manage and maintain that land on both land and water. We want to look at monitoring and reporting what we're seeing out there. One of the things we just did in the last year is we formed a partnership with Polk County Conservation to test about 20 sites for water quality in the city of Des Moines. So now we can be part of their water quality monitoring program that we can start to benchmark and see what the quality of the water looks like in the city. And then we want to continue to engage volunteers and other resources throughout the management of our natural resources. And I briefly talked about it in the beginning, but it's also finding ways to get nature in every park. It doesn't have to be a major stand of oak woodland or a greenway with a creek in it. It could be something as simple as a butterfly garden or a rain garden to capture and treat stormwater from a parking lot in the park. So looking at ways that we can put nature in just about every one of our parks. And then finally, we wanted to look at ourselves as an organization and make sure that we were prepared to serve the Parks and Recreation needs of the community in the future. So we're calling this innovation, and it really looks at us as an organization and says, what do you need to do to be prepared for this? So some of the approaches we're going to look at is we want to leverage best practices from other park systems. There are thousands and thousands of parks and recreation agencies across the country that we can go out and see what's working really well for them, bring it back and adapt it to what works in Des Moines. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel from Parks and Recreation. We also want to evaluate our existing processes and our decision-making criteria to make sure that we're on the right track and not be afraid to maybe change it up if what we see or what the evaluations show isn't necessarily serving the community. And then finally, we've been very successful in the last 10 plus years of finding partnerships to really increase the value of what Parks and Recreation is in Des Moines. That means working with corporations, nonprofits, individuals to provide money to improve facilities, but also means working with organizations to volunteer their time and their efforts to meet and raise money for parks and recreation improvements. How can we take the success we've had and continue to multiply that across the community to really take the limited city dollars that we have and expand those to improve parks and recreation? Also, one of the things we asked the consultant to do is knowing that it's going to take 20 plus years to really accomplish a lot of these things, and maybe even more. What are a few things that we needed to start with right out of the gate that would help us to be a success and really push us in the right direction? So they made some recommendations on policies to undertake. Equity will be probably the number one that we tackle. What does equity mean to the community? What are some projects that are important? What are some processes to undertake? Are there partnerships that would be key to go and reach out and begin forming now? And other standards that we really should be trying to meet as an agency and an organization and how we provide those services. So we're really excited about the possibility, once this is adopted, that we can really get out of the gate and start running quickly. And I'll just wrap up with this. We're here tonight for a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. This will continue to the Parks and Recreation Board later in the month. We'll have a presentation with the City Council in the morning of December 10th and ask them for consideration of this as an amendment to Plan DSM at the December 17th meeting. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or if anything you have for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought this was a spectacular job, so you've done a wonderful job here,
Thank you.
and I appreciate it. I'm curious about the proposed amendment, where it looks like where we'd be changing is, you mentioned a number of times, 10-minute walk to parks, and it looks like we're being asked to change that to 10-minute walk or drive to a park.
It really should just be 10-minute walk. So we're just looking at this from a pedestrian standpoint. So that might be an error.
So if I'm looking at the staff recommendation, the highlighted piece, am I misunderstanding?
Yeah, I think I pulled that from
The reason I'm asking is because it looked like this was added specifically to change that language.
So I just reading it here, maybe one way it could be interpreted is that the way people would walk there is along some sort of vehicle route. So a road that has a sidewalk on it. It's some way we look at it.
I see, via vehicle access. That doesn't. You're not saying that means via vehicle, or you're accessing it via vehicle.
Yeah.
Is vehicle access? That's not considered safe walking route because it doesn't have a sidewalk? Is that what we're saying?
It certainly could, yeah. One of the things we're going to look at is what's the potential maximum impact based on our existing trail and street network, and then where is that limited based on just exactly what you said. There's no sidewalk, there's maybe not a safe crossing. What if the park is exactly across the street, but the closest safe crossing distance is a quarter mile down, across the street, and another quarter mile back? So we're going to look at opportunities like that and say, what's the best case scenario based on our existing parks and trails network? And then where are some of the deficiencies, things we need to work with the transportation department to improve? What are things we need to do from a parks and recreation standpoint to improve access? Are there easy access points to open up? Are there ways to increase ways people get there? But it's the metric itself is solely based on someone that would be walking there. Now they can certainly get there in a lot of different ways.
I guess I'm sorry to be caught up on this. I guess I'm reading what the.
So that was the language that's already in Plan DSM? And the change is really the conversion of the quarter mile to the 10-minute.
Oh,
Yeah.
which is on page 5.
But David is correct, pardon me for interrupting, Dave, that the language is confusing. I mean, frankly, I had the same problem. It sounded as if a 10-minute drive in the car, which isn't what you're trying to do. And I'd suggest that you have some kind of a change in it to, regardless of what Plan DSM says, to make it clearer, to say all residents should live within a 10-minute walk of a park, trail, or open space, or via vehicle access facilities, or a safe walking or bicycle route, something to make the vehicle less important and the vehicle access facility more important.
I mean, from a standpoint of our intent, probably the simplest statement would be that all residents have access to a high-quality park within a 10-minute walk of their home. From our intent of what we're trying to accomplish, that probably the most simple. And then we work that out from one of the things we're going to do is immediately upon adoption of this plan is we're actually going to go into a pretty in-depth analysis of the entire city, our existing parks and trails, and really figure out what percentage of that people meet that metric now, and what are some priorities for making sure that we can increase that over the next few years.
So Richard, would you be fine with just dropping off the via vehicle access or safe walking bicycle route? Could we just say all residents will live within a
Yeah.
10-minute walk of a park, trail, or open space facility?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
You might want to say safe
Safe
10-minute walk, because that's the language.
yeah.
Yeah, safe
Yeah.
walk. And I just wanted to, on your statement about using our schools, some of our schools, where they, for example, Brody Middle School.
Yep.
Obviously, the city and the school district intended for that area to be a park, and I
Yeah.
believe it is called Brody Park. If I hear you correctly, you were saying that other communities don't view that type of
Yeah.
joint interaction as.
We're not sure. We're kind of guessing. So where this has come from, for a long time, the measure of parks and recreation services in a community was the number of basketball courts per 10,000 people, or the number of acres per 100,000 people. And we really felt that just never really was a good description of how well Parks and Recreation serve the community. A good example is between Easter Lake and Ewing Park, you have almost 1,000 acres of park and open space land on the south side. But the south side has the lowest percentage of residents that have a park within a 10-minute walk of their house. So it's a very misleading statistic. And so what's started to occur in the last 3 to 5 years is the Trust for Public Land, which is a kind of a nationwide nonprofit land trust that seeks to preserve and protect park and open space land across the country, not just locally but federally. And the National Recreation and Parks Association, as well as the Urban Land Institute, have really partnered together and believe that this is probably the best metric that you can do is what percentage of your population lives within a safe 10-minute walk of a high-quality park. That really says how well you're serving the community. And like we talked about earlier, it might be a whole number of different things. One of the things we've kind of theorized, and we don't have actual data, is they excluded the schools on that because not every school is open to the public outside of school hours. That's our guess because it's something they've used nationwide, but do say in one of their kind of methodologies is that unless an agreement exists for public access.
But you're talking about the building. I mean,
No, they're talking about the grounds is what they say to us. So in that, so if you factored in all the elementary schools that are in Des Moines, almost all our gaps would be filled. But for really the purpose of it, we'll want to work with the school district to formalize an access like we did at Brody. We also have formal access up at the Hoover Meredith complex for public use of the tennis courts and the walking trail there as well. So it's something that we work really well with the school district to provide those services and those facilities. So one of our plans would be really to say what elementary schools maybe fit in some of these gap areas, and what can we do to work to improve that and make a better public park there for them and the people.
I know you probably were you were in school, but many, many years ago, the Des Moines School District had a Vision 2005 agenda, which we proposed to the community and there was some funding. It was going to be a bond issue. Right? There was a bond issue. That there was a formalized relationship between the city and the schools for many purposes, for libraries, for some people on the board probably remember that. And I think what occurred is that some communities thought it was an excellent idea and really wanted to work towards that. And then we just kind of lost,
Yep.
probably some of the luster in some of the other neighborhoods. So would that be a possibility to revisit some of the language that was in Vision 2005?
Yeah, I'm not aware of it. We'd be happy to go back and we can work with the school district or maybe find where we can get some of that information. But, one of the things we do is we have an agreement with the school district that we update every year. It talks about anything from use of their facilities. So one of the things we're able to do is we're able to use a lot of the gymnasiums as well as recreational fields to do programming offerings. So we offer like our flag football program at a lot of the different middle schools. We also use their gym space for our youth basketball program. We also work with them to provide the free lunch in a lot of our parks in the summer. So we have a lot of great working relationships with the school district as well as individual schools to find ways to continue to increase opportunities and ability for kids to engage in their park system, take part in the programming offerings, expand those offerings. One of the things we're trying to explore from an equity standpoint is knowing that there's a large population of the school kids are in free and reduced lunch, is there a way that we can allow them to get into a lot of our program offerings for a much reduced cost if they qualify for that program? Right now we have what we call as the GRASS program. It's got an acronym, but I think it's Greater Des Moines Activities and Scholarship Program. But in order to be eligible for that, you have to go up to the Community Action Agency. They have to verify your income. And then from there, you have to be issued a card. Then you can come down to the office here, activate that as part of your account, and then you can be eligible. But are there ways that we can remove some of those barriers from that? So one of the things we're exploring, are there ways that maybe just every kid within the Des Moines School District that is eligible for free and reduced lunch is now eligible for our discounted programs? So we're really trying to look at things like that that really helps improve the equitable service and delivery of those facilities and programs to really get more people engaged in there. There's about 16,000, I think, kids that would be eligible for our kindergarten through 8th grade programs. And in our youth basketball, we only serve about 800 of them. So we really feel like there's great opportunities to grow and get a lot of school kids engaged in what we do and the programs that we offer.
Were you going to say something, Mike?
Well, it's just, so Richard, you would be revising the recommendation to state all residents should live within a safe 10-minute walk of a park, trail, or open space facility, period?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
We've got a map and a list of 79 parks.
Yeah.
So that's our current situation. Applying this aspirational provision of our residents being within a 10-minute walk
Yeah.
of a park, trail, or open space. What's the percent? You had that question and an answer that you gave just
Yeah.
a bit earlier.
So we did an analysis about 5 years ago, and we were about 67% of households were within a 10-minute walk of a park at that time. That did not take into account how easy it was to cross the street. So we just assumed at that point, because that's the only data we had at the time. So if you took an actual, it's probably a little bit lower than that, but we believe there's a lot of access that we've improved since then, so it's probably still around that percentage. And we're actively out. I mean, even before the adoption of this plan, we're actively out trying to find ways to improve access to people within a 10-minute walk of their house. We're actively out working with developers in some of the growing areas of town. So in the northeast side of town, we're actively asking if they'd be willing to set aside a couple of acres. Would they be willing to let us purchase a couple of acres? Are there ways we can make trail connections? So we're out there actively doing that now, and hopefully we're going to make some great strides here in the next 3 to 5 years to really increase that access.
So the 67% number is not 100%, largely because of a lack of park space at this time, not being able to get to our existing.
Correct. So, there's a few big gap areas, and maybe the best way I can describe it is there's one in the fairgrounds neighborhood. If you think about the fairgrounds being north of that railroad line, bounded east by the fairgrounds on the east, the railroad lines on the west near like East 20th, and then University Avenue in the north. That's a pretty big population area that has zero access to a park. The only kind of park area there would be Willard Elementary School. But that's on the very southeast corner of that. So that could help potentially to serve a portion of that population. But you still have a very big gap there where they don't have access to that. And they would have to cross, even if to get to the existing park, so Ashfield is up on like East 18th and Hubble Avenue, they still got to cross Hubble Avenue to get there. They got to cross railroad tracks. There might be not sidewalks in some of those areas. So it's looking at all those areas. Again, the south side, there's almost no parks on the south side outside of a couple small neighborhood parks, and then 1,000 acres of amazingness out at Easter Lake and Ewing Park. But, which is great if they can get there, but most of the time they're probably not going to get there. They'd love to have just a little neighborhood park close to their house or a trail that allows them to access the trail system. So it's trying to find ways in those developed neighborhoods to do that, and that will be a challenge. But it's something we're committed to finding a way to do. We've already got several discussions about how can we work with the school district to maybe improve a middle school or work to improve an elementary school. So we're really trying hard to see if we can kind of start connecting some of those dots.
Thank you.
Richard, I have a question about the number of parks in the city. It's my impression that the park system, which began with the great parks, and they still are the great parks,
Yeah.
Has been over the years, over many years, a bits and pieces approach to acquisition. And some lands, I think the city has acquired not really wanting them, and so forth and so on. And it's a patchwork quilt at best. And patchwork quilts can be fine, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of what it is. Libraries sort of have this, to use an analogy, a similar kind of a situation. And typically libraries on a regular basis, whatever the regular basis is, prunes the collection to try to keep it manageable and to remove those books that are no longer popular or no longer have a function and so forth and so on. It's been my impression again that because there's so many pieces in the park system, some of which work well and some of them which do not work well, how does the plan address the ability to prune the park system?
So yeah, that's something that's come up in the past, and actually something we actually addressed here probably less than 2 years ago. We had requests from some neighbors that lived adjacent to Royal Park. And so if you're not familiar with Royal Park, I believe was on 9th and College, roughly in that area, territory there, a little bit northeast of the Grubwa IMCA facility. And the adjoining neighbors approached us and said, this isn't really working. It's not a good park. There's a lot of problems with it. There's just a lot of crime, and the quality is pretty low. And so what we did at the time is we took this kind of 10-minute analysis and we said, if we remove this from the system, that it wouldn't really impact the service or the number of people that are within that 10-minute walk to a community. So what we said to them is, hey, we think this will be a standard in LibDSM, but what we're going to do is we're going to give you a private lease. We'll rip all the playground equipment, we're going to take it off our maps, and we'll let you have a garden lease on it. Because you're exactly right. It was a house that was torn down in the 70s. The existing owner, after it was torn down, didn't want it, so they just turned it over to the city. And we've been stuck with it ever since, and would never be a site that we would have ever chosen for even a tiny little pocket park. And so we said to them, after this plan's adopted, we'll go to a formal analysis, and if we feel like that doesn't remove service for people that live around there, then it's something that we could consider. And I think that'll be really the highest metric that we'll use to make recommendations like that. But I don't think it'll happen very often, because despite being a patchwork of a system, they're remarkably well placed in most situations, that if you took out a park, that it would leave a pretty big gap. So I think there's very few instances where you could do something like that. And Mayor County likes to tell us, and it might have been when he was on the Plan and Zoning Commission, that he proposed selling, he didn't say how many parks, but he tried to sell at least one park and got eaten alive. So he said, we won't be trying that again. So no, I don't think there's very many that we could do. We're obviously always going to try to work. If it's too small, are there opportunities to add size to it or improve the quality of it or the access to it? But I think it'd be a very rare situation where moving forward that we would get rid of an entire park. Maybe a small piece of it, but we also see an appetite from the Parks and Recreation Board to not do that at all. Just to give you an example, we used to have a series of caretaker houses throughout the system. So Greenwood Park used to have a caretaker house. Pioneer Park used to have a caretaker house. McHenry still has one of them. They were just little bungalows that were for the regional park manager back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And we've torn a lot of them down. But we had a really nice high quality one. It was a brick structure down in Pioneer Park, and it sat on a typical size residential lot and was adjoining to other residential properties. And one of our recommendations was, hey, it makes some sense. We can put a 1/4 acre back on the tax rolls and have a nice house that could go to someone. And the City Council and the Parks and Recreation Board were very adamantly against that, taking any land. They're very sensitive to those things. And so I think it'd be a very rare case where we would probably do that. But certainly it's something we'll always look at. It just may not make it very far.
Interesting history. Yeah. Any questions on this side?
It's an expensive luxury.
Yeah. It very much is so.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
can tell I'm very excited
Yeah.
about this
I like your shirt.
proposal.
Yeah.
Do my best
Seems a
always
little
to
deliberate.
promote Des Moines Parks wherever I go.
Well, we appreciate
And
it.
I've been to all of our aspirational cities that you listed.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, in Denver, I was here about a month ago, and the transient people we would maybe call homeless, they do not, they call them urban dwellers. So, urban dwellers. who
Yeah. Well,
live in their parks.
a neat thing for us is both St. Paul and Minneapolis, up here in an aspirational city, have been ranked by the Trust for Public Lands the last several years in a row as the #1 and #2 park systems in the country. They rank the 100 largest cities and the quality of their park systems, from anything from the access that we talked about to the amount of money their community spends on parks and recreation, all the way to you name it, how many community centers, basketball courts, facilities that you have across there. And they've been a very steady #1 and #2, just being that close to us. So one of the things we're going to do is spend a couple days up there next spring and really talk to them about what do they do, what makes them so good at what they do, and what we can bring back from them to really take some of the elements of this plan and move that forward in improving our park system.
Richard, their park system was developed in the 19th century by a landscape architect named Cleveland.
Yep.
And Cleveland, before he went to Minneapolis, worked in Des Moines.
Oh, really? I
So
didn't know
you'd
that.
better tell him and them that. Okay,
Yeah.
we're first, okay, or at least.
Oh, he would
Yeah,
say
and we love seeing things like that and learning the nuggets from the histories of that. And so we're excited about that and see what we can bring back next spring. Thank you.
again. So commission, are there any other questions? Okay, generally, we ask the public if they have any questions. I'm sorry. That's what I'm doing now. I'm sorry, I'm opening the public hearing. If there's any questions in the public, seeing no public tonight. No other questions from the commission, I'll close the hearing. What's your pleasure?
I'll move staff with the amendment to the sentence which Mike earlier stated. The sentence concerning the 10-minute walk will read, all residents should live within a safe 10-minute walk of a park, trail, or open space facility.
Period.
Correct.
Thank you. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. That it? Are there any nays? Doesn't look like it.
Rick, I just wanted to commend the park board and the steering committee and the staff for their work on this plan. Richard, it's really rewarding to see the major goals of the Plan DSM getting implemented. And this was one of those major goals that was identified immediately by council as part of their strategic plan. And so it's really nice to see this getting moving forward. So nice work. Thank you.
Thank you again. We'll look forward to your progression and see where we end up. All right, at this time, we are ready to move to committee and directors' reports. And I believe, from your standpoint, Mike, from the...
I don't have anything other than there is no meeting with the city manager tomorrow.
And then from the commission, generally it's this time of year that we start asking if there are any volunteers for our annual, I think we call it our nominations committee to nominate our slate of officers for the next year. So just asking if there's anyone who is interested in serving in that committee this year.
Oh,
Who he is and Will is. And thank you. Anybody else?
I think I've done it, so I'm saying somebody else can do it. But if somebody wants me to do it, I'll do it.
We'll keep that in mind.
Okay.
How many people do you need on the committee?
We usually have about 3, because you know, in case of a tie or,
Happy to
great.
serve
Okay,
if that would be helpful.
Nominate Jack.
so we'll have 4.
Do what?
Hopefully there won't be a tie. And if anybody else is interested, just let me know. And who will convene the committee of these 4 individuals? Shall I just leave it up to you 4? All right. Is there any other business before us tonight, before the body? All right, I'll move that we adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Oh, I forgot to add my plug for,
Oh my God.
Richard.
Oh, I'm busy that day. Check my schedule.